this vibrant, pulsing land. Thank you for the energy of the light of consciousness, and the starlight, the sunlight, the light in our solar plexus, the light in the central fire that gathered us together millennia ago. Thank you for that vibration that still exists here. Thank you for the pulse. Thank you that it goes through the air, the breathing aware air, the prana, the pneuma, the ruach that's here in New York. Thank you for the waters that surround this island, and the waters above the sky, under the earth, and the river, streams, lakes, and oceans, and the water in our heart that connects us to the heart of nature. And thank you for Pachamama, Mother Earth, that we're born from and that we return to. Thank you for Mother Earth. Thank you for her blessing. Thank you for the blessing of all the critters on Mother Earth. And thank you for the way that we're all interconnected. Thank you for the way that we come here to feel that energy and to feel how all the structures of consciousness are still here, still present, still penetrating everything, and still connecting us, and connecting us hopefully in beauty, because what we're doing here is very, very important. Thank you for all the people who've come here. Thank you for the efforts of Jeremy, Sabrina, and others to bring this together. Thank you for that beautiful opportunity to share with each other. And aho.
Okay. Thank you, Glenn.
You're welcome.
Okay, so I appreciate everybody being patient as we get set up with the tech. But we have a little sort of informal introduction. So first of all, welcome. Hi, Brent. And this is our 47th annual conference. I'm very happy to be in New York, my home city. And this transparency and planetization, seeing through the world. And it's not exactly a Teilhard Gebserian combination, but we wanted to kind of bring Teilhard in here. And originally Peter Weston was going to do a little introduction to planetization, but I ended up writing something and wasn't able to attend. Let me just get this up here. Kind of its own literary invocation. So, to kind of begin with Teilhard de Chardin, if you're not familiar with his work, we'll start with him. He was a Jesuit theologian, paleontologist, mystic. He attempted to, or was engrossed and captured by the idea that something mystical is happening with evolution. And I think when Gebser read Teilhard, he a kind of kinship with him, and in the second edition to Ever-Present Origin, he ended up writing just a little passage connecting him and his work with Sri Aurobindo as well. And I think key and very important to kind of opening Gebser up and opening up Ever-Present Origin is this concept of planetization. So I'm just going to read this little thing that I wrote. So his most famous book, The Phenomenon of Man, in some sense sees through time, the whole of time. It sweeps up the evolution of consciousness on Earth by following the interlinking trails of the nervous system as a hyper-object in itself, slithering and writhing and tugging across the phylogenetic tree until culminating in the lotus of the human brain. Important or complementary to this interpretation is what Teilhard described as within of things, the authority of the cosmos, a nearly panpsychic activity across all animals, perhaps even plants and minerals. Its mind all the way down. With the human subjectivity, Teilhard describes it, folds on itself, intensifying the process of self-reflection. He also described this very famous idea, or just phrase, the universe is aware of itself. Tool making and creativity, and of course the birth of art, really modern consciousness. 1,000 or so years ago. So, like a tightening gyre of complexity and consciousness, human societies begin to proliferate and give birth to kingdoms, nations, and give birth to the whole and global industrialized world we see today, interweaving into the inextricable of some future being. This tidal pool of history is short of a singularity which we feel undulating through time from the future towards its realization. Planetization in theological biology or evolutionary mysticism is the process by which this complexity consciousness, which is another process he describes, continues to double over on itself into another crown jewel here, of the earth that joins all beings, human or otherwise, into intensified consciousness in which the individual is not subsumed into the whole. Karl Gebser's terminology is transferred to it. Of the future humanity for Teilhard is Christ, only a return of the individual, but the descent of the Holy Spirit into all beings. Evolution, to sum up, is a drawing up of the world as it yearns toward greater and greater realizations of mind. Planetization is that process by which mind becomes the world and the world becomes mind. What kind of world is that? Would it be made of the stuff of dreams? Interiority cut upon the world? If the art and mysticism in our origin is any indication of such a leap, then the singularity of the omega point, what Teilhard kind of described as a of evolution, would be unequaled, total, and infinite. Before there, and in the constrictions of the gyre, it would seem that mind is both dream and the world. And before we can get to knowing, the veil of history is rendered transparent to all to reveal the omega looming ever present. We challenge ourselves presently to respond to this leap in consciousness. Gebser's structural mutations. The integral structure in planetization is not something that we as a species can own and say that. Rather, these processes and incalculable forces appear to happen to us. And are happening, and in the truest discernment between catalyst and catastrophe, we must decide upon how to respond. And just to kind of close, what is being called on us from without is essential to bring forth what is within us integrally. And to quote Gebser, the German proverb, how we shout into the forest is how the echo will say, is undoubtedly true. And the forest is the world. Everything that happens to us then is only the answer and echo of how we ourselves are. And the answer will be an integral answer if we have approached the integral. Yep. Sabrina, if you want to come up and do some more.
Yeah. So perfect, Derek. Thank you so much. You're always so articulate on the interconnection between the thinkers that are in their own sensitive to the changing currents. Gebser, William Thompson, etc., etc. So what is happening? And he says so well, you don't decide.
And the trials of the initiate, transforming the warrior spirit. He lives in suburban DC and is a member of the Young Society of Washington, the International Association of the Jungian Scholars, and is on the executive committee of the Jungian Society for Scholarly Studies. Currently revising his first book on education into a 2-volume series, and those are, if you're curious to take a look, The Archetype of the Teacher and Education, Culture, and Democracy, the American Experiment. And thank you for joining us, Robert.
My title page is going to come up.
Lights are on, but nobody's home.
The lights are too bright.
Turn off the lights in the front.
I kind of faintly see something.
Sorry, I was
Oh, there's something down here.
I think that's the lights in the back of the room.
That might work better.
We are learning to
Back to origin.
interact on human worlds.
This is the non-human world, all right.
Okay.
Okay, so that's hooked up.
Are we gonna do old school just with the laptop?
I don't know.
I like these images, I hope they're gonna come up.
Yeah. Thanks for your patience, everybody. Yeah, you might want to grab a cup of coffee or a water while we're preparing here.
You want my again?
No, we got it here.
It's this brain communicating to that brain. We have to find the language.
So we just gotta find the source.
Signal. I would think, yeah, right?
No, it's not that.
Settings.
Source search.
There you go.
Computer,
That's it. Yeah.
Off. Should be on. Yeah.
No. To when? Oh, really?
Try it again.
What?
Try it again. You didn't have it on. There's a different button that we got to hit for it to come on. It's off.
So that
Is there a
We
button?
can set up
Other
a
button?
table, we just set up for a chair here in front of the laptop on
okay, so it's got what's
it. I have two selections. Ah, we have another podium, here we
I don't know what to say about it. It seems like it's on.
do you want to try computer?
We could try that, but it's just not
No,
HDMI.
it's not finding it.
Well, will it go off the USB? Because I have the USB right here, we can just plug that in.
No, it's
No.
not, that's not the issue. Try to computer just in case, maybe. I mean, we should just try it.
Just keep going off.
Jeremy's distances, which are how visible my computers will be.
Here we go.
When you
Yes, one.
it really keeps you on track. I just pressed.
This is for that.
They're going to be okay, but we go further back. Or these people.
I can also read if it gets small.
Is that readable from here? Oh, you couldn't get it on the tech.
Maybe try to start this one.
Okay. Oh, well, I have to see the screen. I got my glass.
That right into the thing. Because then we have a source, right? Plug the HDMI cord, it doesn't get confused. Okay, just in case.
So you have a PC
USB.
and you.
You say control.
And then back to that source. Speak up, absolutely. Turn that on, okay. All right. Select enter.
Exactly.
Display.
Just push up that voice and
Yeah,
everything else out.
USB.
And that helps.
This is enter, right?
All right, we're on USB display now. Something like that. Oh boy. This person.
Press the question.
Yeah.
Happened.
It's got to go ahead with the
Yep.
presentation. We're gonna have to do that. I'm gonna go see if Judson has another one. See if they've got a USB. Yeah, I'm gonna see if they have a whole other projector.
I'd like to express, I was thinking.
Yeah, we're gonna. I'm gonna see if we can get another projector.
Okay, let us begin. Should we turn this on? I have to turn this on so it's not flashed.
I tried to write down.
With regard to this autodidactic examination of the consciousness, Gebser says, slide 8, the integrator is able to concretize the very pathway, the pathway of the natural individuation process, both refer to a conclusive transformation of the individual personality. Such a transformation is possible not only at the ontological level, but also at the level of an entire culture or the whole planet for that matter. Again, quoting Gebser, our consciousness must master integrality and make possible its realization. Let us now turn to the question of collective consciousness that is revealed in both Gebser and Neumann, discussion of recapitulation theory. No slide now. We can begin with the Gebserian perspective on child development. At birth, the child's psyche emerges out of the ever-present origin, the Godhead at the center of the psyche, what Jung called the self, with a capital S. But the child is not born into the void of an a priori unconscious. It is born into the receiving arms of the anima mundi, the world soul, a subtle web of life that is the interconnectedness of all living beings on the planet. This web of life has its own means of individual expression, impulse, presentiment, and instinct that govern individual relationships with other beings. This web constitutes what Gebser called a consciousness, though he also equated it conceptually to pre-consciousness. The motivation of archaic consciousness in the individual is to satisfy the instinctual drives. Jung postulated 5 basic human instincts that are innate to the child: hunger, activity, and creativity. Though there are other instincts that come into play. For example, the relationship between the child and the mother, out of which it is born, is an instinctive relationship of nurturance. This nurturance instinct, this instinctive nurturance relationship charges the instincts in the child to autonomous expression in terms of what Jung called the child archetype. Let me tell you a brief story about how this plays out. In the mid-1950s, a young woman by the name of Jean Liebloff, who was raised in New York, while traveling alone in Italy, met 2 adventurers mounting an expedition to the South American rainforest to search for diamonds, and Jean wanted to go along. They took her to the Yaqui Indian tribe and left her there as a guest captive for nearly 3 years. Jean spent her time observing the interpersonal relationship, particularly between the adults and the children, which she noted meticulously in her notebooks that have been published in her book called The Continuum Concept, which has been continuously republished by Addison Wesley since 1975. In the book, Liebloff tells a story of an infant that was just beginning to crawl, approaching a deep and dangerous pit. Gods. In his deficient mode, these projections become the dark other, unrecognized as images of our own psychic constitution, but rather a threat to it. The fourth developmental stage, the mental structure of consciousness, begins to become dominant with puberty and can be equated to what psychologist Jean Piaget called the capacity for abstract conceptualization. In its efficient mode, exemplified by the ancient Greeks and American Indians as reason, it demonstrates a balance between the preceding mythomagical structures of consciousness and the emerging mental structure. Ontologically, this balance is becoming very rare, but can still sometimes be observed in the middle school environment of young adolescents. In this deficient mode, the mental structure of consciousness takes on the characteristics of rational logical positivism, in which the instinctual, sentient, and imaginal characteristics of the human psyche, the archaic, magical, and mythic structures of consciousness, are completely repressed into the unconscious. That is, the unconscious, which is ontologically and phylogenetically collective, does not exist a priori, but is a construct of successive structures of consciousness subsuming the preceding structures. Here I am using the verb subsume, where a more psychological terminology might be repressed or suppressed. Subsumed means to classify within a larger category, which in turn implies that the preceding structures of consciousness are not repressed, but rather sublimated, and are still accessible to all of us as in our instinctive, sentient, and imaginal relationships with each other and with the world. This sense of sublimation is characteristic of the efficient mode of mental consciousness. Repression would be characteristic of the deficient mode, which then requires Freudian psychoanalysis or Jungian analytical psychology to recover. In Freudian analysis, the recovery of the instincts, the repressed feelings and images become subordinate to the cultural superego. In Jungian analysis, the patient examines with mental consciousness and reconciles his or her conflicts with instinct, sentient, and imaginal structures so that they acquire a degree of maturity and equilibrium and can become concretized. The very process of the individuation imperative that Gebser talked about as leading to integrality. Next slide, please. Very briefly, I want to outline Erich Neumann's process of ontological development that emerges primarily in two of his books, The Origin and History of Consciousness in the Child. Beginning from the perspective that consciousness is centered in the ego, Neumann's exploration revolves around the evolution of the nascent ego. Originally, the nascent ego is contained in the Ouroboros, a pre-conscious state defined by the Great Mother and the Great Father. The nascent ego of the child eventually coalesces in the child archetype that must fight its way out of this confining matrix, only to find itself confined within the matrix of the mother archetype, characterized by a magical participation, mystique, and mythic imagery. Here, the evolving of the child will discover its heroic element and fight its way free of the matrix to find itself confined in the matrix of culture, the matrix of the archetypal father, or what Freud calls cultural superego. When the ego becomes integrated and strong enough, it will turn inward to discover the archetypal self, or imago Dei, the struggle to reset along the ego self-axis. In other words, the emerging ego consciousness is a constant and violent, heroic, archetypal struggle, clawing its way to the top of the heap of consciousness. Along the way, it discovers its heroic element in order to turn inward and become transformed and recentered along the self-axis. While I must hope the similarities are to some extent obvious, a detailed discussion of how this relates to Gebser's concept, the integrator must be able to concretize structures of consciousness, perceive their effect on his or her life, and master the deficient components of her insight constitutes a much broader discussion than this presentation. In conclusion, I can only hope that this brief talk helps to clarify these 2 points of tension between Jungian and Gebser thoughts, not only on the processes of human development, but on the phylogenetic transformation of consciousness that is the sign of our time and was recognized by both Carl Jung, Jungian psychologist, by Jungian psychologist and by John Gebser. Individuation from the perspective of central birth and integrality strive to achieve the end, the individual integral personality. That is in the transformation of the human cultural condition. I will on this forward-looking trip toward individuation in backward and ontological development. So end with this quote from John Gebser. Last slide. By returning to the very source of human development, we observe the structures of consciousness unfold, not only discover the past, but also a view into the future, which reveals the traits of a new reality amidst the age. Thank you. Time-wise, Jeremy.
A few minutes for questions would be good. Anybody has some comments?
I think it's so gives confidence to me in the 20th century and even in the 19th century, different individuals, and I would include Rudolf Steiner in this collection, for pedagogical reasons, were separately aware of these distinct world structures, the magical, the mythical, mental. And what you from your background in pedagogy is very important. We see that it's not a very theoretical thing to say that we are phylogenetic, we are relating in our biological development, in the development of our brain and our nervous system in the first 20 years. We are recapitulating the echoes of the collective. And so the period of latency in the emergence of the next structures is a little bit different between the scholars you have mentioned. That's a very key point, because as time accelerates, I think that latency also accelerates in the individual. So now we see little children, born into a technical environment, simultaneously worlds emerging, and as they have been, as they have been in the 19th and 20th centuries. And so what you bring is very important. It helps us see that still enough, if we're quiet enough to study our civilization enough, it becomes so that the individual is a recapitulation of humanity. The question is
it's not going to cut. Yeah, it's going to look.
So it'd be better if we could get this thing going.
Okay, so we were looking at the Wi-Fi part, right? I opened airport. Here's airport.
Okay, hang on. Okay, so it said selecting. Click the airport icon. Is that the airport icon? That's not it. That's airport activity. Do we have an airport icon?
There is no.
And that's the only connection.
Airplane to.
I like music, but I just can't get the favorite access.
Try it.
Would you like to join for lunch, please? Oh, sorry.
Oh, there's nothing coming up now?
Can you pull this up
I
on
think
your
it's
computer
lunchtime.
and I will go in and because I can mirror on this, I think, or let me just see. It says screen mirroring. I'm looking for Apple.
Ding, 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 ding. We could go any length of time. Yeah, I like the flexibility.
Because this has got like a little LAN configuration.
In older days, that would happen. See what we're going to do.
Other Gebser conferences? Seriously?
Are you going to lunch? We're going to do something.
Yeah, let's go to lunch.
Yeah, we're going to do something.
Unless we're ordering in.
I think that would be
Maybe actually, I've got my
There are plenty of places all around here. It's great.
That's for keynote to quick time.